Welcome back. Today we'll be talking about arrays. Before we get started, do read chapter 7 of the text to get better context of what will be discussed today. So far you know primitive data types such as ints and doubles and booleans. Arrays allow us to represent collections of these primitive data types. So collections of ints or collections of doubles. Once arrays are created, they are a fixed size. And after that, you can refer to individual elements of these arrays by what is called indexing. We'll discuss that in detail. So let's talk about how you would declare an array. Array declaration takes this form where you start with a data type, and then you have the square brackets followed by the name of the array variable and then semicolon. As an example, here you have an array of integers. So you start with data type int, the square brackets, and then the name of the variable, which is numbers. This declares an array of ints. Now note that you're declaring an array, but you're not allocating space to it yet. So all you have said is this variable numbers is an array of data type int, but there hasn't been any memory allocated for numbers. So let's do that next. So you create an array by allocating memory to it. And that takes this format where you have an array variable and you equal to followed by a new keyword or new reserved word called new, the data type, and then followed by the size in square brackets. So for the above example, you would have numbers, which is a variable name, equal to new into the data type, and then in square brackets it says 10. So this creates an array of 10 integers. Note that you can declare and create an array in one statement as follows, where you declare int brackets, which says this is an array of ints, then the variable name, equal to new int 10 in brackets. So here you're combining both the declaration and the creation of the array. Once the array is created, you can initialize individual elements. And the way you do that is you index the elements as such. So you have the variable name, and then in brackets you indicate which element of that array you are modifying, equal to followed by the actual value, right? So here we have gone down and initialized all 10 elements of the array to various values. Now notice that the index starts with a 0, just like everything else in computer science. Things start with 0 and they go up to size -1. Now to get to the size of the array, you basically use the array variable name dot length, and that gives you the size of the array. When an array is first created, it contains default values. So if it's an int, by default it'll be initialized to 0. If it's a boolean, that might be initialized to false. Now do watch this video. It steps through in detail declaring an array and using it in various formats. So it's gives you a lot more hands-on experience. Now, as we saw above, an element of an array can be referred to as below, where you have the array variable name, and then in square brackets you have an index number. So for example, numbers in brackets 3 refers to the 4th element of the numbers array. Now, this right here is also referred to an index variable. Now the reason it's called an index variable because it is a variable and can be used any other place a normal variable might be used. So for example, you could use it both on the left and the right hand side of an assignment. So numbers 2 could be equal to number 0 plus number 1. It can be used in for loops as such. It loops through all the elements of the array. right? And it sets each element to a certain computation, right? Now above we saw one way to initialize an array by setting each of the index variables that refers to it. We could do this more explicitly as such, where when you declare the array numbers, you could actually initialize it to set of values within curly braces. So here it does two things. It sets the memory allocation for this array to make it of length 4, as well as sets the individual elements of the array to specific values, right? So this would be equivalent to doing this, where you've gone ahead and initialize the array and allocated memory to it, and then you have gone ahead and set the individual index variables. So with the approach above, we have done all of these statements in one shot. Now, what's the best looping variable to work with an array, right? So we know about a while loop, we know about do while, we know about for, right? And it turns out that for loops are ideal for working with arrays. The reason is that all the elements of the array are of the same data type, and the array is of a fixed length. So that allows us to write for loops for them quite easily. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's say you had an array of numbers and you wanted to total up all of its values. Here's how you do it. You'd initialize a variable called total to 0, and then you loop through the array, collecting all the values into total. Similarly, if you wanted to find the maximum value in a number array, you would declare a variable called max and initialize it to the first element. And then you'd loop through the array, comparing each of the numbers to max. And if it was greater, you would update max. So you can probably imagine that you could use a similar mechanism to calculate the smallest element of an array. Now there's a special construct available for stepping over each element of an array. This is called the for each loop, and it still uses the for keyword. For example, if you wanted to write a quick loop to print each element of an array, you would do it in this nice short notation. For the purpose of the class, it's good to know this, but we really will not be using this. Array assignments work on something called references. So they work on locations in memory, right? So let's take an example. Here we have declared and initialized two arrays. Numbers 1 points to memory that holds these 4 numbers. Numbers 2 points to memory that holds these 4 numbers, right? Now, if you were to say numbers 1 is equal to numbers 2, now both numbers 1 and numbers 2 refer to the location in memory where these 4 numbers are held, right? So now no variables are pointing to this location in memory anymore. And in Java, that location in memory would be reclaimed and would be cleaned up for you, right? It's called garbage collection, right? So the important thing to note here is that array assignment work on references or pointers to locations in memory. If you really wanted to copy, make 2 copies of the array, you would really have to do it in a loop such as this, right? You will not be making a copy with assignment operators, right? The other alternative available is this array copy method, a system array copy method that works so. Now, in a previous lesson on methods, we had talked about how primitive data types such as int, double, boolean, and so are passed by value. So a copy of that variable is made, and that copy is the one that's passed in to the method. Now, when arrays are passed as arguments to methods, a reference to the array is passed into the method. So what's passed in is a pointer to the location in memory, right? So if within the method you go ahead and change the array, then it will be visible to the outside world as well, right? Similarly, when arrays return a value, so if it's specified in the return statement, a reference to the array is returned, not a copy of the array, right? Lastly, I want to talk to you about command line arguments, right? So do watch this video on how to use command line arguments. We'll talk about it here a little bit. If you recall that when we declare the main method, there was this strange argument that gets passed into the main method, right? So let's talk about that. So here now we know arrays, so now we know that args is an array of strings, right? So what that really is, these are the command line arguments that are being passed in to main method from the outside world. So for example, if you're calling your program, and your program is called myjava, with some extra things after it will be passed in to main method through this args parameter. And what it would be in this case, args.length would be 2, right? And args0 will be the -i string, and args1 will be the 56 as a string, right? And you'll actually be using this in your programming assignment. Okay, so that is all we want to talk about in arrays, and I will talk to you next time.